Alright, today I'm going to color grade DJI Pocket 4P D-Log2 footage in Davinci Resolve. So first of all, let me show my project settings. I'm using Davinci with gamut intermediate for the timeline color space, and then Rec 709 scene for the output color space because I'm grading on a Mac computer. Next, I am going to apply my basic node tree just to make it a bit easier and quicker at the same time. This is my Roma power grade. I'm going to apply this. And by the way, I am selling this power grade for only $10. It works pretty much any camera out there. If you are interested to check it out, link is going to be down below. So first of all, let's start with the basics, IDT and DRT or ODT. With the IDT, I am going to take D-Log2 and transform it to Davinci with gamut intermediate, and then with the DRT, I'm going to transform Davinci with gamut intermediate to Rec 709 gamut 2.4 because that's what I'm using on my reference monitor. So first of all, in here, in the IDT, I am not going to use the color space transform tool because it doesn't have the D-Log2 input gamma. As you can see, there's only D-Log. We need D-Log2. Blackmagic needs to make an update to have it in here. So let me delete this. Then I'm going to select the node, click Shift Space, DCTL, and then I'm going to select DJI D-Log2 to Davinci with gamut intermediate. This DCTL, by the way, is completely free. Link is going to be down below. Now with the DRT, I'm using a DCTL as well from JP2499, which is also completely free. Link again is going to be down below. And this DRT basically takes me from Davinci with gamut intermediate, as you can see in here, to Rec 709 gamma 2.4. All right, first of all, as you can see, this shot looks really bright, and that's because I on purpose exposed this shot to the right to get the cleanest image possible. If I'm going to play it back, there is barely any noise. Like I can barely see any noise in this shot. So if you want to get like the cleanest, image possible from the Pocket 4P and you are using ISO 1600 like myself to get the widest dynamic range, I would highly recommend exposing to the right to get a cleaner image overall. So first of all, I am going to go to the exposure node in here. HDR wheels, global. By default, my node tree will already apply like a -1 with the exposure, but I'm gonna go a bit more. Do something a bit more reasonable. I would say somewhere around here looks good, like 2.8 I would say. So I pretty much overexposed this by about like 3 stops, more or less. Next, I am going to go to this FLC node in here, which is where I apply my look with Filmo Creator in Davinci Resolve. And just to show you what it does, here is a before and after, before and after. As you can see, it applies like a mini look to the shot. But by the way, this plugin in here works only with the studio version of Resolve. Let me just select a different one, maybe Cinematic, Rochester, Akasaka. I think Akasaka looks nice, honestly. Elated, no. Vintage, no. Aurora, no. I'm gonna stick to Akasaka. So after this, I'm gonna come back to the exposure contrast node, and I am going to adjust the contrast in here with the primaries. I'm just gonna use this contrast slider. Maybe increase the contrast just a little bit. Personally, I love my images to be a bit punchier. This looks fine. I also have like a contrast node in here, as you can see. This is done with the curves. I've anchored the middle gray point for Davinci with gamut intermediate in here, and it's basically like applying a filmic contrast curve for you guys. I would not personally touch this too much. This is basically the look development contrast. If you need to adjust the contrast, I would use the contrast slider in here to apply like global adjustments overall to the shot. All right, next in here with the white balance, I'm definitely going to adjust the white balance. I'm using the linear gain method. So it said the gamma is set to linear, and then I'm going to use the gain wheel in here to adjust basically the white balance. So as far as I can see, and it's very hard to see at the moment because I have a giant light in here, but this image is a bit too green and also too warm at the same time. So I am going to subtract a bit of green, just like so, and then I'm going to increase the blue just a little bit at the same time. Now this looks a bit more neutral to me than before. Here is a before and after, before and after. Hopefully it's right. It's really hard to see with the light in here, but as far as I can tell, it looks a bit cleaner than before. Maybe I can do a slight adjustment with the red color in here as well, just to reduce a bit of red, just like so. Let's see, definitely looks slightly more color accurate. All right, next I am going to adjust the saturation. I'm using the HSV saturation method by basically only using the gain and gamma wheels in here to add or subtract saturation. Personally, I love applying, increasing the gamma with the saturation here, just because it applies saturation to the least saturated areas, and then with the gain wheel I reduce the saturation just to reduce saturation from the most saturated areas, just to kind of like balance the image out overall. And again, it's really hard to see what I'm doing because of this big light in front of me, but I think this looks a bit cleaner than before, or maybe it's a bit too much, something like this. Yeah, this looks definitely a bit cleaner. All right, next in here are all of my secondaries, basically like masks and windows and stuff like that. Skin softness I'm not going to use because I don't have skin tones in here. Hues I am going to adjust soon. First of all, I am going to enable this density node just to add a bit more density to the colors, and I'm just using this color slice tool in here with the density set to 0.05. If you want more density, you can increase this, but I would not go too much with this because it can easily add artifacts to the footage, even though D-Log2 is very strong and flexible. But something like this looks totally fine. Looks a bit more filmic overall, more dense, the colors. Skin hue I am going to disable, I don't need that. And then highlights I am going to enable. This basically, I have this node in here to compress highlights in like skin tones or like super bright areas in the frame. So by default it will highlight, as you can see, the brightest parts of your frame. You can adjust everything in here with the luminance slider with the qualifier basically. By default it should work just fine in most cases. We're going to leave it in here roughly. And then I like to go to the curves and basically reduce this part, the highlights in here, to compress the highlights and slightly reduce the exposure and the contrast in the highlights basically. I think something like this works fine. And then maybe just to add a bit of a touch, I'm also going to play with the highlights slider in here, just to make the highlights a bit more natural looking at the same time. Maybe like -25. It's going to work fine. Here is a before and after, before and after. As you can see, the image looks more organic overall. But now I think I am way too saturated. Let me see actually the vector scope. Yeah, there's a bit too much saturation. It's going to reduce this a little bit with the gain, just slightly. And then I'm going to come back to my hue node in here, open the color slice tool, and start playing with all of the colors in the frame. First of all, I'm definitely going to play with the yellows because they are pretty much dominating the scene. I'm going to push the yellows more towards like green, something like that. And I'm definitely going to add more density just to darken these colors and slightly desaturate these colors at the same time, just to make it a bit more filmic and moody. Something like this. And here you can see like a before and after, before and after. Looks a bit more natural to me. Maybe it's a bit too much. I'm gonna bring back some yellows, maybe reduce the density a bit too. And then I'm gonna play with the oranges and like skin tones, if you will, just to make the transition from these oranges to these greens a bit more smooth. Let me see what I can do. Yeah, I'm definitely going to desaturate this slightly, increase the density a bit, and maybe push it more towards red. Something like that. Let's play also with the reds. I'm gonna leave the saturation as is, and then I'm going to just increase the density a bit and push it more towards red, just like so. So now I feel like the image looks a bit cleaner overall. Next, in terms of like windows, first of all, I am going to enable this isolator in here. Go to my windows, disable this, and I'm going to use the pen tool. I'm going to create a window in here. And then I'm going to increase the softness to about something like this. And I'm going to use this blue line in here, connect with this one. And I'm going to click on this node, and I'm going to invert this node basically to target everything outside of my original selection. I'm going to go to this node in here, and I'm going to reduce the exposure a little bit maybe something like so. And on this node, I'm going to do the opposite, slightly increase the exposure, just to make this guy in here pop a little bit more. Just a little bit. Here's a before and after, before and after. As you can see, it makes a pretty big difference. It's barely noticeable, but it definitely makes a big difference. Maybe actually, I'm going to bring back some of the exposure in here, just to make it a bit more balanced. Let's see it again. It definitely looks a bit cleaner. Now also maybe I'm going to add another node in here, parallel node with Option P, and then I'm going to select my windows in here, circle a window, create a window around this guy. Let me just see. It's totally fine while the clip is playing. Looks good to me. And then I'm going to invert the selection to affect everything outside of this dude in here. And then I am going to reduce the exposure just a little bit. Maybe like minus 0.15. And here is a before and after. Before and after. And if I'm going to select all of these nodes in here, here is a before and after, before and after. Right, next I'm going to add like a split tone color effect, if you will, with this split curve node. In here I'm using the curves. I like to make them bigger to make it a bit easier to see everything. And I am going to separate all of these colors, the luminance, red, green and blue channels basically. And I'm going to try to create like a split tone effect between the shadows and highlights. In this case I'm going to go for like cooler shadows and slightly warmer highlights, which is what this node is going to do by default, by the way. But let me just play around with this, adjust it a bit more. If I can, let me disable the editable splines. I don't need that. Again, it's very hard to see because of this light above me in here, but I'm trying to do my best. And then I think I'm going to subtract some of the warmth in the highlights. Maybe something like so. Here is a before and after. Before and after. As you can see, it definitely adds a bit of a style to the image overall. And then just to finalize, maybe I'm going to use the saturation clean node. In here I just have like a basic, cleaning for the shadows and highlights. Usually I like to add a point in here and then play around with this edge point in case if I want to clean up my shadows a little bit. Again, it's really hard to see in here, but I'm going to leave it in here roughly. And here is a before and after, before and after. And maybe actually we can also add grain. You can see if I'm going to zoom in, it's going to add like a little bit of a grain effect. I'm just using the default grain settings in here in Davinci Resolve. And again, here is a before and after. Let's play this back actually, see how it looks. Nah, I'm not a big fan of this. I think I'm gonna disable the grain, honestly. It looks too weird. Actually, I think I'm gonna come back to the hue node in here and slightly bring a bit more orange to the reds. The temple looks a bit too reddish to me. Something like so. And maybe we can also reduce the exposure a bit more. Just like so. And increase the exposure on the guy a bit more. Something like this. And honestly, I think I'm done. Alright, so I hope you found this video to be informative and useful. Don't forget to check out my power grade down below. Also, the DCTLs I've mentioned in this video are going to be down below. And also, if you bought my DJI Pocket 4 and 4P D-Log2, thank you very much. But soon I am going to update that LUT package basically with the D-Log2 LUT as well. If you bought the D-Log2 from me, expect basically an update pretty soon, completely for free, by the way. So hopefully you find this video to be informative and useful, and I guess I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.